So if you've been reading through Twitter recently, or I guess X, because that's what we're calling it now, except no, we're not, Elon, nobody's going to call it that, stop trying to make X a thing. Ratchet and Clank Ripped Apart came out on PC, and apparently, good golly, it's just bombing. It's bombing everywhere. It's doing so poorly. Except, is it though? While Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart surely isn't making the same kind of gigantic explosion that games like Spider-Man and God of War did on the PC, I think it's important that we have a bit of perspective here, because I think a lot of PlayStation stands and a lot of just perpetually AAA-minded people have a bad habit of looking at games and judging them based on the absolute highest possible standards, when they were never trying to be that. Because I saw a lot of reports like this, that it's the third worst performing game so far, that it's not doing well on PC. But here we are on Monday morning, it's 7:30 a.m. Colorado time for me. Ratchet and Clank is still number 7 on the new and trending tab on the Steam homepage. And when you go over to top sellers, including free-to-play items, it's at number 9. So it's certainly doing well. There's certainly a lot of people buying it and a lot of people playing it. Where people seem to be getting this metric of it, oh, it's not doing well, is based on the concurrent players. Which, yeah, obviously Ratchet and Clank isn't going to be fucking cranking player counts. It's a single player game and it's not very long. It's not the kind of game that's going to hold a top spot for concurrent players. It's the kind of game that people are going to buy, they're going to work through it, a couple hours at a time, or they're going to blast through it right when they get it, and then they're going to move on to something else. It's just not the kind of game that's going to be cheesing concurrent player counts all the time. That's just an unrealistic thing to expect from it. And it's an unfair metric to hold it to. I also want to point out that this is not a game that was really, doing amazing sales on the PlayStation before. At least not by ridiculous Sony AAA standards, the standards held by the people that are saying the game flopped on PC. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart reportedly sold 1.1 million copies on the PS5. 1.1 million copies. That's a lot of copies. I'm not trying to shit on 1.1 million copies on one platform. That's still impressive. But there's just a ridiculous double standard here when you look at the PlayStation sales compared to the PC sales. Ratchet and Clank sold 1.1 million copies, and you have people talking about how amazing it is, how great it is, how wonderful Ratchet and Clank is. Meanwhile, God of War sold how many fucking copies? Horizon Zero Dawn sold how many fucking copies? And yet you will never see people make the sales comparison between those games. But on the PC, oh, it's the third worst selling Sony game. If Ratchet and Clank comes out and sells 1.1 million copies on the PS5, you're not going to get a whole bunch of outlets being like, oh, this is in the bottom percentage of first-party Sony releases. Oh, that's so terrible. But when the game comes to Steam 2 years later at full price for some fucking reason, then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, it's the third worst performing Sony game. All the while, the game is still in the top 10 on Steam, on the homepage, on trending and top selling. The game is doing fine. On PC, oh my god. If you're going to report on the PC market, can you please even try to understand how the PC market works? Concurrent player counts are not everything. But that's not really the crux of what I wanted to talk about here. The main thing I want to talk about is the fact that despite this game doing well, it's, again, by all available metrics, it's doing well. It's not doing it's certainly underperforming based on what Sony probably wanted, but what Sony wants and what's realistic are two different things, as I'm sure you're probably aware by now. If anything, I think Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is a perfect indication of why Sony needs to start going day and date with these things. Because yes, this is a major, it's a major Sony game, major PlayStation game, big deal that it's coming to PC. It got a big marketing push. There was a lot of effort behind this marketing push, that's for sure. And the port was good. It's a good port. I'm going to pick it up once it's not $60, because that's the biggest problem here. Well, that's one of the biggest problems here. Put simply, a lot of PC players are not going to drop $60 on a game that came out 2 years ago. It doesn't even matter what the game is. A lot of people are just not going to do that. And the funny thing about that is Sony fucking knows that. That's why games like God of War and Horizon and Days Gone and Spider-Man, they didn't launch for $60. I don't know why Sony is now all of a sudden hiking the prices of their ports up. And again, the game is doing well. But it's not doing as well as Sony expected. So I'm simply here from the PC perspective, trying to be like, hey, here's what you can change. Here's what you can do better. Here's how you can get this game to the top of Steam sales. Here's how you can get that game to the #1 spot on Steam. And the first thing you can do is maybe not release this game next to Remnant 2, which, you know, is like a bread and butter game for the PC community. And while we're on the topic of Soulsborne games absolutely destroying it on Steam, hey Sony, maybe you could pull your head out of your ass and port Demon Souls and or Bloodborne to this platform. Because genuinely, like, look at these numbers for Remnant 2. Look at, like Remnant 2 is fucking destroying it over here. And I say it for like the 20th time. Elden Ring sold over 10 million copies on Steam in the first week. Like, genuinely, Sony, what are you waiting for? Sony really wants to be a big part of the PC community, but they are just utterly unaware of how the PC community functions, which is why they're releasing $60 ports of multi-year-old games after already establishing that they know people don't want to pay for that, like with God of War and with Spider-Man and Horizon and Days Gone. And I could be wrong about one or two of those. One or two of those could have launched for 60, but I know for an absolute fact, I absolutely remember God of War coming out for like 50. I'm pretty sure Spider-Man came out for 50. I think Horizon came out for like 40. Maybe Days Gone came out for 40. Like, the point I'm getting at is Sony was releasing PC ports in the $40 to $50 range up until like a year ago, and now all of a sudden they're expecting us to pay $60 for these games. How much is Ratchet and Clank at GameStop right now? If I were to walk into GameStop and get Ratchet and Clank, how much would it cost me? Let me just see. Like, Ratchet and Clank brand new at GameStop is only $40. Why would I pay 60? Why would a PC player be stoked about paying 60? You know what I mean? So there's that. But also, you guys, you gotta start going date and date with these things. You gotta start going day and date. Because if you really want to sell PC games for $60, if you really insist on doing that, then you need to release them at the same time as everyone else. And like, I know some of this might sound like, you know, PC YouTuber yells at cloud, because again, the game is doing well on PC. I don't mean to like kind of add, I don't mean to add any credence to the people who are saying this game isn't doing well. I'm simply trying to provide feedback so we can get to the point that you people seem to think it should be at. Never mind the fact that you never expected this game to be at the same level as God of War or Spider-Man on the PlayStation, but you expect that from the PC for some reason, because you people are fucking weird. But if Sony really wants to dominate the Steam charts, like they did with some of their previous ports, it needs to be cheaper, and new games need to be day and date. If you want to sell as many PC copies as possible, you need to include the PC community with the initial hype campaign. You need to include them with that initial like pre-order campaign. As much as I hate pre-orders, you have to include the PC community with those things. A lot of Sony games are sold, and a lot of just AAA games in general, a lot of new AAA games generate the most of their sales in their release window before people can talk about it, before people can spread the word. So if you want to get cynical about it, if you want the PC community to be buying as many copies as possible, you need to include them with that initial manipulation. Like, I don't know why this is complicated. The fact that a 2-year-old game like Ratchet and Clank, a game that's really not even the kind of bread and butter game for a PC anyways, it's like a PS2 era, you know, action platformer. I love those kinds of games. I grew up on the PS2 era, but that's not even really like that's not really the kind of game that you expect to do gangbusters on the PC, and yet it's doing really well on the PC. So imagine how much better it would have done if you included the PC with the initial hype campaign and also got some extra copies sold from the people who were waiting for a sale because you insisted on selling this fucking thing for $60 2 years after launch. In conclusion, I don't even know if this game underperformed by Sony's standards, because we just don't know how many copies of the game have been sold, and we don't know how many copies of the game Sony was expecting to sell. But if you want to go along with this idea that the game underperformed on PC, then you need to also accept that Sony needs to change something here. There is obviously a market for these games, because even by the underperformance that you guys want to say this game had, it's still on the top 10 of Steam trending, it's still on the top 10 of Steam sellers. The game is selling very well, but if you insist that it's underperforming, then Sony needs to get their fucking head out of their ass with this pricing, and they need to start going day and date with these things, because obviously there is a market, and obviously PC gamers are buying the game. But if you want to maximize these things, Sony needs to get with the times. I will happily buy Ratchet and Clank once it goes down to like $30, $40 maybe. If 40's a little high, but like $30, I'll buy it for $30. I love the PS2 era of 3D platformers. I've been playing so many old PS2 era games recently. I would love to play Ratchet and Clank, but I'm not gonna drop $60 on this game because that's twice the amount of money I dropped on Spider-Man. Like, I'm just not gonna do that. Anyways, toodles.